Some doors weren't meant to be opened, but you didn't just open it. You kicked it off the hinges. There's a strange shift that happens when a chosen one actually goes there. When you stop being afraid and stop playing the character of the modest, safe person they gave you, you go straight into the area they claimed you couldn't survive. That's when everything around you begins to go wrong. The energy shifts, people act weird, and suddenly you're the topic of meetings you were never invited to. It's not superstition, it's energetic law. Physics even hints at it. Observation changes behavior. The moment your awareness entered the battlefield, the rules rewrote themselves. You didn't cause chaos, you simply revealed it. And now they're panicking because you weren't supposed to make it this far. You weren't supposed to pull back the curtain, expose the illusion, or heaven forbid, enjoy yourself while doing it. Oh yes, you laughed in places designed to break you. And that's when fear turned into frenzy. So here we are. You went there. You crossed the boundary that can't be seen, not to make a point, but to fulfill a prophecy. And now the same ones who doubted your arrival are watching their carefully constructed world start to unravel. Buckle up, because what you just birthed isn't a nightmare. It's revelation with a sense of humor. Number 1. You didn't cross the line. You erased it. That's what happens when you finally stop apologizing for your evolution. For so long, you played small because you were told to stay humble, to stay within limits drawn by people who were terrified of what would happen if you stopped caring about their comfort. But once you decided that enough was enough, something shifted. You stopped being careful about other people's feelings. You stopped asking for permission to be strong. You stopped waiting for systems that were designed to keep you average to give you the go-ahead. And the moment you did that, the air changed. They called it rebellion, but it was actually restoration. You weren't breaking rules. You were correcting lies that had been treated as law. Every time you spoke truth, they labeled it too much, not because it was wrong, but because it was right in a world that profits from confusion. The line they said you crossed was never divine. It was constructed by people to keep the unusual within and the normal outside. The funny thing is that the line was never actual. Fear and repetition kept the illusion going, but fear only works until someone fearless shows up. When you stop negotiating with your own potential, that illusion collapsed. Suddenly, people who once felt superior started feeling exposed. The same ones who said you were out of line were really saying, "You've stepped out of the box where I could control you." There's a certain silence that follows when someone truly steps into their authority. Not arrogance authority, the kind that doesn't need validation, doesn't seek revenge, doesn't shout to prove its worth. It just moves. That kind of energy unsettles people because it carries a freedom that can't be manipulated. And yes, you went there. You walked straight into the forbidden zone, the area that others only talk about but never dare to enter. You didn't wait for a sign. You became one, and now every boundary they built looks ridiculous. Because you proved that power isn't given, it's realized. You didn't cross the line. You just showed the world that it was never powerful enough to hold you. And once that truth hit the air, no one could pretend not to see it anymore. Number 2. You didn't attack anyone. You just existed. And somehow your existence alone started pulling the masks off people who had been hiding behind fake smiles and false intentions. It wasn't your words that exposed them. It was your energy. The moment you entered the room, everything that wasn't real began to shake. You didn't do anything dramatic. You just carried truth in a world addicted to pretending. That's the thing about genuine light. It doesn't have to announce itself. It just shows up, and everything fake starts to crumble. Some people didn't hate you because you were wrong. They despise you because you made it hard for them to keep lying. They weren't upset because you created trouble. They were upset because you broke their image of control. You were the bug in their software, the thing that couldn't be changed, the indication that being genuine is still powerful. People began to show their true colors when you came around. People's true reasons came out. The ones who smiled in your face couldn't keep the same energy anymore. It wasn't your fault. It was the energy mismatch. Darkness can only survive in dim rooms. When light comes on, exposure happens automatically. You didn't want to start a conflict, but you were the one who made secret intentions come out into the open. They couldn't believe that someone who seemed so peaceful could create so much trouble. But that's the funny part. Real power doesn't need to show off. It is what it is. You turned into a mirror without meaning to. Everyone who met you saw themselves, even if they didn't want to. The ones who were genuine felt peace around you. Those who weren't felt anxious, annoyed, or even scared. Not because you scared them, but because they scared themselves. Your presence made people responsible without any fights. They stated you swapped or changed, but really, you just stopped becoming dimmer. You didn't become stronger overnight. You simply quit concealing your strength. The fallout wasn't a punishment. It was a chance to be seen. The truth is, they weren't hurt by your existence. It showed them. And once the truth comes out, you can't go back to pretending. You were never their adversary. You woke them up. That was what scared them the most. Third, you were the one thing they couldn't predict. Everything about you messed up the order they needed. They had a method to read, change, or control everyone. But the formula didn't work for you. They didn't expect you to behave that way. You didn't need other people to tell you that you were doing well as they did. You didn't give in to pressure or look for acceptance in the wrong places. When they thought there would be chaos, you moved quietly, and when they thought there would be revenge, you showed grace. You were the curveball that broke their pattern of control. They couldn't study you, since you weren't motivated by the same things that motivated them. They attempted to get a rise out of you, guess what you would do, and figure you out. But every time they thought they had you figured out, you changed, not because you were pretending, but because you were growing quicker than they could keep up with. You didn't act out of emotion, you moved with purpose. People who depend on control can't foresee when consciousness will come. Your volatility didn't mean you were confused. It was a plan from God. You followed an order that didn't originate from the real world. So, of course, the real world couldn't understand it. They wanted to put you in a box, a role, a label, something that was familiar to them. But you wouldn't let them. They were worried because you were the unknown element in their equation. They tried to use your kindness against you, but it didn't work. When they tried to make you feel bad, it didn't work. When they thought you were going to give up, you came back stronger than ever. Every plan built against you started to collapse because it was based on assumptions that no longer applied. You had changed dimensions, but they were still using old data to figure out what you were doing. That's why they were so confused by you. You moved like you knew something they didn't, and you did. You knew who you were, and you can change or foresee. That type of self-knowledge. It doesn't follow trends, schedules, or what people anticipate. It just moves with a goal in mind. You became their error message, proof that human patterns can understand divine logic. You weren't the chaos in their story. You were the mistake that their system wasn't ready for. You made darkness see itself. That's what real light does. It doesn't run after shadows. It shows them. You didn't have to go on a crusade, wave a sword, or let everyone know you were there. The moment you entered the room, the energy shifted. The lies, the manipulation, and the hidden jealousy all started to shake because your vibration didn't match their disguise. Your light wasn't loud, but it was in your face. It had a truth that made pretending impossible. Many people believe that darkness is afraid of being destroyed. It doesn't. It doesn't want to be seen. It does well when it can hide, tell half-truths, and not be held responsible. But having you there made things less comfortable. You didn't come to fight, you came to think. That reflection was the punishment. People saw what they were running from when they looked at you. Their own motives, their own dishonesty, and the parts of themselves that weren't healed. That's why some people turn on you for no reason. They couldn't put it into words, but being around you was like looking in a mirror they didn't want to see. You reminded them of the truth they wanted to forget because it was too easy. You didn't blame them. You were just real. And for those who hide behind masks, that honesty burns hotter than fire. You didn't have to fight. It was your calmness, your silence, and your consistency that did the trick. Darkness wants a reaction because it needs one to grow. But thinking about it makes it starve. You made it look empty again and again until it couldn't hide anymore. That's why it tried to turn your light into something scary. It didn't want to face its own decay. It wasn't a fight between good and evil in the spirit world. It was a wake-up call. There wasn't any darkness outside of you. It was all around you acting like it was strong. And when your light came on, it knew it didn't have any electricity at all. It just had privacy. Once seen, it shriveled. You didn't kill the dark. You showed it. You didn't battle demons. You helped them see their own reflection. That's what makes noise and power different. You don't win by swinging. You win by standing. Real light doesn't chase shadows. It makes them tell the truth. Fifth, they tried to bury you in doubt. but you grew roots in fire. They talked fear into your path, hoping it would make you less sure of yourself. They told you things that made you feel bad about yourself, but they sounded like advice. They wanted you to doubt yourself so much that you would give up on your calling before it ever had a chance to grow. But skepticism didn't kill you, it made you. You learned to breathe in smoke and still exhale purpose every time they attempted to take away your confidence. You learned to deal with stress until it became a part of your life. You didn't only live through what was designed to break you, you learned something from it. Every betrayal was a plan. Every holdup turned into data. Every setback made you more aware of what strength really is. You stopped thinking of rejection as punishment and started thinking of it as a way to change direction. That's when your development stopped focusing on being comfortable and began depending on being clear. They assumed fire would kill you, but you were made for it. Some souls are made of water. They move, they change, they come, but yours was formed of magma. It changes everything it touches. You weren't melting, you were being shaped. The heat that they thought would kill you became the forge that made you who you are. You were unrecognizable when you got out, not weaker, not bitter, but clean, and it was the part that baffled them the most. They thought you would come out hurt, hobbling, and needing confirmation. You came back with a vision instead. The more they tried to make you doubt yourself, the more you stood firm in the truth. You didn't need applause to know you were on the right path anymore. You didn't need outside help anymore. You had seen yourself live through the unthinkable, and that kind of evidence silences every voice of fear. They can't believe you're still standing, let alone doing well. When they look at you now, they don't know you stopped living in the topsoil. You began to draw strength from the depths they tried to trap you in. You were never put in the ground. You were put in the ground. And when you finally got up, you weren't soft. You came back strong and steady, with a fire that no one can control. They tried to bury you in doubt, but they didn't know one thing. Pressure doesn't kill God's plan. It turns it on. 6th, you walked into a place you weren't supposed to be and took control. The areas they told you not to go to weren't dangerous because of what was there. They were dangerous because of what you would find when you got there. It was never about physical boundaries in the forbidden zones. They were mental barriers that kept you from seeing how much power you really have. You weren't doing anything wrong. You were breaking the rules of programming. Every don't go there was a way to keep your spirit in check. But there was something in you that wouldn't let fear dressed up as wisdom hold you back. When you went into those off-limits areas, everything they said would kill you only proved that you were meant to be there. You felt the resistance not because you were trespassing, but because you were taking back what had been taken from your bloodline, your destiny, and your calling. You didn't come to borrow land. You came to take back what was yours. And that scared the people who had been living there comfortably. Some gates only open when someone is brave enough to ignore the warning signs. You turned into that person. You went over barriers that other people spend their whole lives going around, talking about, thinking about, and being afraid of. You didn't need permission because you already had the power. The threat wasn't there to stop you. It was there to check you out. The fact that there was resistance showed that the space was valuable. No one protects things that aren't worth anything. And everything changed as soon as you stepped inside. The air knew who you were. Old energies that had held power for too long began to lose their grip when you showed up, which meant new ownership. There was no need to shout or fight. Being there alone changed the frequency. Because divine authority doesn't negotiate. What was once hostile started to obey your orders. It puts things in order. You weren't being bad by going where you weren't supposed to. You did what you were told. The call wasn't for people who were weak. It was for the chosen ones, who could go into places that scared others and not be scared. You didn't come here to prove anything. You came to remind the universe that scared people don't own what is sacred. It is for people who aren't afraid. You didn't break the law. You took back what was already written in your name. Number 7. Your awakening set off a chain reaction in the spiritual matrix. Your consciousness rising didn't just change you. It messed up everything that had to do with you. Energy is like a circuit. And when one strong current rises, the whole system feels it. That's why things started to go wrong right after you woke up. People went away. Chances went down the drain. Things got awkward in conversations. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a correction. Your new frequency began to show you things that were never in line with your truth. Every wrong connection started to fail. People who used to blend in started to look strange. Because your spirit could finally see clearly. Your new level of clarity made it impossible for fake loyalty to last. Their motives started to fail because the version of you they were used to was no longer there. They got to know your old self. The one who put up with nonsense, ignored red flags, and said sorry for being alive. They lost access as soon as that version died. Your vibrations started to change every room you walked into. Energy that used to scare you now bows down to you. You don't chase after belonging anymore. You give it a new meaning. Things change when you talk. Old frequencies start to scramble to fit in when you enter a space. You didn't get too full of yourself. You got in line, and every time, alignment shows distortion. That's why things seem to get out of hand after your big break. When truth comes in, systems based on lies can't work. You didn't lose your grip. You got it. The problems weren't just bad luck. They were spiritual upkeep. The matrix around you had to update because you woke up. Lies, fear, or manipulation can't handle the new information you have. You really couldn't lie anymore. Some people said you were far away, cold, or hard to recognize. But what they really meant was that you can't be programmed anymore. You stopped moving because of guilt, stopped pretending to be at peace, and stopped ignoring your gut. And that level of awareness makes people who want to control you stop working. Your waking up wasn't quiet. It was an explosion of energy. It shook up dimensions, broke contracts, and showed people what was real. You didn't just change. You changed everything about your life. At this point, Everything around you has to be true to you or leave your space. That's what a real awakening can do. It doesn't feed in the matrix, it changes the wiring. Number 8. You made the war that wasn't there real. They kept it a secret for years. The manipulation, the jealousy behind the scenes, and the quiet competition. Everything was supposed to be subtle, psychological, and hard for the average person to see. But once you became aware, you could see through the performance. You began to hear things that weren't said, feel things that weren't shown, and put together pieces that other people didn't see. You didn't try to find out the truth. You couldn't hide the truth from yourself anymore. The illusion broke when you opened your eyes. The fake piece suddenly felt heavy. The smiles looked fake, and the mood itself started to show what people were really feeling. You didn't make things tense. You just stopped pretending you didn't feel it. You were the only thing that stood out in a room full of shadows. And as soon as you shone, the act was over. Even people who used to make fun of spiritual warfare can now feel that something is changing, something that can't be denied. They say you caused trouble, but all you did was make things that were already happening more obvious. Darkness can only grow when it can work in secret. The moment you know what it is, it loses power. You broke its hiding place by naming what others ignored. You didn't start a war. You brought exposure. The mess was never new. You just turned on the lights. And that's why you were a threat to systems that relied on lies. You weren't loud. You were right. You didn't accuse. You saw. You could see through masks that people had worn for years. And your awareness started to break their hold on you. That's why some people stopped talking to you. You didn't change. Lo, you could now see too clearly for their comfort. The truth is that the war that no one could see had always been there, moving through families, workplaces, friendships, and spiritually, emotionally, and energetically. It was never about good and bad in a movie way. It was about being honest versus being fake, and being real versus being in charge. You just became an observer, which made the hidden things impossible to deny. You didn't cause the chaos. You told me. You didn't cause any division. You showed where it already was. And now that the mask is off, no one can act like they are someone else. There was always the war. You just made it impossible to ignore. Number 9. You weren't a threat until you knew who you were. They thought you were harmless before that. You were smart, kind, talented, and full of potential, but not too bad. They felt safe as long as you weren't sure of yourself. They could be your hero, mentor, or puppet master as long as you doubted your worth. Your light was helpful as long as it stayed dim enough to hide their shadows. But as soon as you remembered who you really were, not the version they told you to be, but the one you were meant to be, everything changed. Your awakening didn't make you full of yourself. It made you strong. You stopped looking for validation. When you finally realized that you were the validation, you stopped begging for tables to sit at because you knew you had the banquet inside you. That knowledge alone broke years of quiet control. They couldn't use flattery to get you to do what they wanted. shame you by comparing you to someone else, or make you doubt yourself, because being aware makes it impossible to manipulate you. They thought you were dumb because you were humble, not realizing that you were just being patient while you learned the game. You stopped following their rules completely. When you finally realized who you really are, fear set in when you became unpredictable. Not fear of what you might do, but fear of what your honesty would show. Because people who are awake can see through things. They see reasons, not masks. Your power was never about being in charge. It was about getting noticed. You remembered your divine plan, and that you were made with a purpose, not just to get permission. Once you figured that out, their plans fell apart. The rumors didn't work. The guilt trips didn't work. The emotional manipulation stopped working. Everything that was meant to keep you small didn't matter anymore, because you didn't need other people's approval to feel whole. That's why they began to call you different, far away, or changed. They were right. You were different. You remembered. You got back in touch with your source, your true self, and your power. And at that moment, you became the one thing this world can't control, a soul that knows itself. When you were lost, you were never a threat. When you finally found yourself, you became a danger. Manipulators are most afraid of people who know they are free. They don't fear you. They're scared of what you opened. You didn't find a secret formula or hidden ritual. You gave into a change that most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid while they chase status, titles, and approval from others. You went inside to the dark, painful places where the truth burns away lies. And in that fire, you found what they could only pretend to be: real spiritual authority, not power that was borrowed or privilege that was passed down. Power that comes from surviving death after death, emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes literally, and coming back wild. You can teach, sell, or copy what you got. It isn't written down in books or passed down through rituals. When every false identity dies, something divine wakes up inside you. It's the kind of power that doesn't yell, but tells people what to do without saying anything. It doesn't go after chances. It draws them in. It doesn't fight. It just is. People who have built their power on lies are scared of that level of self-control. They looked at what you had and tried to dress like it, talk like it, or copy it. But imitation can take the place of embodiment. You wear scars from evolution, while they wear crowns made of ego. You didn't get your power from being in charge. It came from giving up. That's why it can't be taken away from you. Things that are born in alignment don't need approval or applause. You didn't do anything to become divine. You remembered that you were already. That's what makes them different. You were cleaning up your essence while others were perfecting their image. You didn't learn how to be in charge. You turned into it. Every time your heart broke, every time you were betrayed, and every time you were alone, it was an initiation. They said it was a failure, but heaven said it was preparation. Now your energy is stronger than their hierarchy. Just being there shows what's fake. You don't have to fight for space in rooms. The air changes to make room for you. And that's what makes them uneasy. They can copy your language, but not the way you say it. They can copy your confidence, but not where it comes from. They were never scared of who you were. They were scared of how you could get to them. You didn't need theirs anymore once you unlocked your own real power. And that's a fear they can't understand, control, or contain. Number 11. You spoke energy into places that were used to being quiet. Your words weren't just noise. They were often. Things moved when you talked. You didn't always know it at first, but your presence had a vibration that broke up stillness, healed tension, and woke up what had gone numb. You spoke the truth, not loudly or arrogantly, but with power. When others stayed quiet because they were afraid or comfortable, every syllable had a purpose, and that purpose led to change. You didn't need a stage or a mic. The amplifier was your energy. For a long time, the places you went were quiet. Fear, suppression, and complacency all lead to silence. People got used to not saying anything, not asking questions, and not feeling. But you broke that trance when you got there. Your words didn't just fill the air, they woke it up. Places that had gotten used to being boring started to shake again. The talks got deeper, feelings came back. People started to want the truths they had buried to come out. You didn't come to have fun, you came to get going again. And it wasn't just what you said. How you said it was important. Your tone has a rhythm that makes you feel both sure and calm. It cuts through noise without being mean. It moves energy without fighting. You spoke from a place of knowing, not needing. That was what made it impossible to ignore your voice. It didn't just get to ears. It got to the right frequencies. That's why some people didn't like being around you. They weren't used to sounds that real. Your presence made energies that were stuck move. And not everyone likes to move, especially those who have gotten used to being still. They didn't know that what you said wasn't rebellion. They were resonance. You were bringing the room back to its original vibration. And now your energy stays with me. Something is still different after you leave a room. You can't go back to the way things were before you spoke out, because truth leaves a mark on a place. You made sure that the air would never settle the same way again. You didn't just talk to be heard. You spoke to wake up. You reminded the world what real life sounds like. Unfiltered, divine, and alive. And that sound still echoes in places where other people are too scared to speak. Number 12. You didn't give birth to a nightmare. You broke the trance. They called it chaos because it made them uncomfortable. They called it darkness because it showed them the truth. But what you really did was put reality back in its place. You didn't make fear appear. You showed it. You didn't become evil. You turned on the lights. And when people have been lied to for too long, the truth can be scary. That's what they are responding to. Not your change, but their awakening. You broke the magic, the one that told you to stay small, don't question, and go along to get along. The one that rewarded silence and punished awareness. You didn't want to keep pretending that everything was fine when you could feel the rot underneath. And when you talked, moved, and changed into who you really were, the illusion that kept everyone together started to break. That's why they freaked out. They weren't losing their peace. They were losing their grip. For a long time, the world around you had been hypnotized by routines, walls, and masks that made you feel numb. People forgot how to think for themselves, how to feel, and how to see through the fog. Then you came along with a frequency that made it impossible to deny. You didn't mean to wake anyone up. It was just your being. You became the alarm clock that no one asked for but everyone secretly needed. The problem is that waking up doesn't always look good. It shakes up the ground, destroys false stability, and shows who was only peaceful because they were hiding the truth. So they called it chaos when you walked in with clarity. They called it rebellion when you started telling the truth. They called it darkness when you stopped pretending. Because waking up feels like a nightmare to those who are still asleep. But it didn't destroy anything. It was fixing things. The trends had to end so that life could start up again. You didn't come to frighten people. You came to remind them. You came to show them that light isn't always kind. That sometimes healing feels like hell before it feels like being free. They're not going crazy because you went dark. They are scared because they can finally see. The magic is gone. The sleep is over. And now reality has to wake up and deal with itself. Number 13. You were the result they never saw coming. They thought they could mess with you and not get in trouble. They thought you were giving in because you were quiet. When you forgave someone, you forgot about it. Your patience meant that you could do it. But they didn't get that divine patience isn't a sign of weakness. It's the right time. You weren't trying to avoid a fight. Heaven was gathering proof. Spiritual law was keeping track of every lie, every betrayal, and every fake smile. You didn't even have to lift a finger when it was time to restore balance. You just became the answer. You are what happens when God stops watching and starts moving. They messed around with holy energy, believing that grace had no limits. They thought mercy was blindness, not knowing that mercy always has a time limit.